Hello everyone, in this YouTube video I'm going to write an essay about the expansion of the drone program under the Obama administration. This essay, or the argument of this essay, is going to claim that the criticism of the Obama administration's drone program is as authoritarian and illiberal is valid. I would recommend you go ahead and check out Essay on Executive Power Part 2, my YouTube video, if you want to see an essay written about the Bush administration's use of enhanced interrogation techniques and the programs that the Bush administration kind of kickstarted after the September 11th terrorist attacks. I think this video, however, is going to be useful for you. Like the Bush administration video or Essay on Executive Power Part 2, even if you're not arguing the same thing that I'll be arguing in this video, only because remember there's a part at the end of all of our essays where we have to provide an alternative perspective and then refute that perspective. So you can definitely end up just like switching around my essay, obviously not plagiarizing me, but it definitely would give you a good idea. You could emphasize what I put at as the alternative perspective at the top of your essay, and then kind of the alternative perspective, or what becomes like my evidence and like my position here, you can put that as the alternative perspective if you're arguing the opposite of what I'll be arguing in this essay. I hope that makes sense. I'm a little tired. I know I've been pretty slow at creating these YouTube videos. Honestly, it's been a hectic week for all your teachers as we're going back into the classroom trying to prepare things for you. So please be patient with us and know that we just care so much about you and we're trying to do everything in our power to support you. So even if you still haven't turned in this essay on executive power in, I am not going to be entering it in the gradebook probably for a while, but it is definitely going to be one major summative grade. And then I think you're going to have a unit test before quarter one ends. That will also be a major summative grade. So get it in as soon as possible. Okay. Here's what I just wanted to show. So in this video on Essay on Executive Power Part 1, I break down the prompt. I discuss a little of the background and some of the resources that you use to write an effective essay. And then I provide links in the description itself. And then this part, I write an essay where the argument of this essay is essentially that the Bush administration's conduct in the war on terror it is authoritarian and illiberal, and then I provide evidence. And then this will be part 3. All right, so I'll upload part 3 later after I finish recording this, obviously. Here's some good resources that you can use to expand your knowledge about the drone program. This one is written by Audrey Cronin at George Washington University, Why Drones Fail When Tactics Drive Strategy. It's pretty good. And then this one is written by Dan Byman, arguing why drones work, the case for Washington's weapon of choice. But fundamentally, we are making a little bit of a policy argument in this essay. We're making a policy argument in the sense that we're trying to determine whether the criticism of this program as authoritarian or illiberal is valid, right? And if that criticism is valid, then we are definitely making a policy argument. We're making an argument that it's probably not within the best interest of the United States to pursue it. But we're also making a legal argument as well. Specifically in the case of the Bush administration, I am very curious to see you embed in your essay how these programs are legally justified, right? And something can be legally justified and still you can still find it reprehensible, but I do expect you somewhere in your essay to discuss the legality or the legal basis by which the Obama or the Bush administration justify their actions. So again, in this class, very much an interesting class, very much an intro to law class, and also a intro to political science or government class. Oh no. Okay, so I know I broke down the prompt in another video, but I'm going to break it down a bit here nonetheless. So in times of war, issues related to national security, presidents have claimed broad power in the interest of protecting American lives. Critics have derided presidential actions across the Bush, Obama, and Trump administration as authoritarian and illiberal. And I provide the definitions of authoritarian and liberal right here. Develop an argument about whether that criticism is valid in the case of an administration of your choosing. Use one of the following foundational documents as an Federalist 70, Federalist 51, Brutus No.1, and evidence from your knowledge of U.S. conduct in the War on Terror to support your argument. Remember, authoritarianism means disabling accountability by means of disinformation, secrecy, or disabling voice. And remember, illiberal describes a practice that attacks the dignity and freedom of individuals. So the thesis statement I'm going to have is criticism of the Obama administration's expansion of the drone program as illiberal and authoritarian is valid. Because the program because the government does not know definitively how many civilians are killed in those strikes. Criticism of the Obama administration's expansion of the drone program as illiberal and authoritarian is valid because the government does not know definitively how many civilians are killed in the strikes, and the government has embraced a broad counted those that fit the or actually, I'm not going to get into specifics here. I'll get into specifics in the body paragraph. The government has classified civilian a civilian casualty classification process that downplays the number of casualty, remember, is like injury or death. Okay, so criticism of Biden administration's expansion of the drone program as illiberal and authoritarian is valid because the government does not know definitively how many civilians are killed in the strikes, and the government has a civilian casualty classification process that downplays the number of civilians killed. This you can find specifically in those articles, like the Cronin or Byman articles, but you can also find it in like the John Oliver YouTube video that I'll attach in the description. I felt comfortable assigning the John Oliver YouTube video, and even though some of you don't like John Oliver because obviously he is has a show that is not friendly to a lot of conservative ideas or opinions, only because he is critical of the Obama administration, and I think his reporting and his sources are pretty robust in this video. So you can definitely watch that instead of reading the Cronin or Byman articles. So now you have to use and manipulate a piece of evidence to support this claim or thesis statement. And remember that Federalist 70 is definitely Federalist 70 is definitely a document about definitely a document that you would use probably in supporting a thesis statement that is counter to this thesis statement, and a thesis statement that does not like criticism of presidential powers. Remember, Federalist 70 is a foundational document written by Hamilton when there was a debate about whether the executive branch, the power of the executive branch, should be vested in a council of people or just one individual. And Federalist 70 very much says that a strong execution of law is important for the well-functioning of our government, that a single president, would not be stymied by all this deliberation. A single president would just execute and enforce the law, would make, important decisions quickly, while a council would deliberate excessively and possibly not respond to issues of national security or that relate to issues of national security in a way that is vigorous and quickly. All right, so Federalist 70 is very much kind of a document that you could use in support of an argument that I am not making in this video, but I can kind of explain it a little bit more after I finish writing the essay itself. Yeah, and especially when we get into the alternative perspective point. Federalist 51 is all about checks and balances and the importance of checks and balances and separation of powers. And Brutus No.1 is definitely about the importance of, or definitely critical of, then the proposed constitution's vesting of executive power and authority in one person, right? Critical of it, describing it as almost monarchical. So you can deploy these documents in a different way. I would argue you could even deploy Federalist 70 in a certain way that supported your thesis statement, but I think Brutus No.1 is probably the most concrete piece of evidence that you could use to support your thesis statement. So the first thing you would do is Brutus No.1 describes was or in a Anti-Federalists are skeptical of the then proposed constitution because they saw parallels between the monarchical authority they had just fought a lengthy war to escape from and the federal government, and specifically the executive. All right, so Brutus No.1 is very critical of the power vested in a single executive and the creation of a national standing army, right? So you can see how this implicitly supports this. But the hard part and the most difficult part is always explaining, and this is actually should be explain how it supports. Right, so this is enough of like a description, right? And then I talk about anti-federalists generally, and we're skeptical of the then proposed constitution because they saw parallels between the monarchical authority they had just fought a lengthy war to escape from and the authority vested in both the federal government and specifically the executive. And so now I want to explain, and please don't criticize my writing. Obviously, I'm writing like in a form that is supposed to be accessible. And so now I'm going to explain how it supports my thesis statement a bit. About the powers, concentration of power in executive. In some ways, the awesome power of the president to decide who lives or dies by gigantic semi-autonomous In some ways, the awesome power of the president to decide who lives or dies from the gigantic semi-autonomous weapons from the sky I'm not going to put in some ways. I'm going to put something like this, make it a little bit dramatic, right? Because this is how I'm trying to tie this document, right? And this is what makes it difficult, tying these documents that are obviously written in a time that is so far removed from our society today, and allowing them to speak to arguments that we're making about society and politics today. That's a hard skill to do, but it's a skill nonetheless that so many of us in this class need to master to be successful on the AP government exam in May, but also I would argue should master in order to become better equipped to handle all sorts of questions and interrogate old texts and try to find the answers within those old texts and apply those texts to the modern day, right? And so I would argue that's one of the skills that you can find, or one of those skills that the humanities and the social sciences particularly tries to, or so specifically the humanities, tries to cultivate within students. So the awesome power of the president to decide who lives or dies from gigantic semi-autonomous weapons from the sky is not something Brutus No.1 envisioned, but certainly it is something that would be alarmed by. That type of power that type of power, that ability to determine life or death, is something but certainly something that Brutus No.1 would be alarmed by. That type of power, that ability to determine life or death and calculate civilian casualties. In the British Empire, that type of power, that ability to determine life or death of enemies, and undoubtedly that ability to determine life or death of enemies, and undoubtedly is a type of power that lends itself to becoming abused, right? British No.1 envisioned, but certainly it is something that British No.1 would be alarmed by. That type of power, that ability to determine life or death of enemies and undoubtedly the content of crossfire, is the type of power that lends itself to becoming abused. United States. And the unitary, so by unitary I mean single, right? Because it's opposed to like a council of executives. So there I kind of apply and describe how that's going to support my thesis statement. Brutus No.1 was wary of vesting power in the single executive in the creation of a national standing army. Anti-Federalists were skeptical of then proposed constitution because they saw parallels between the monarchical authority that they had just fought a lengthy war to escape from and the authority vested in both the federal government, specifically the executive. Brutus No.1's worry about the concentration of power in the executive was valid. The awesome power of the president to decide who lives or dies from gigantic semi-autonomous weapons from the sky is not something Brutus No.1 envisioned, but certainly is something Brutus No.1 would be alarmed by. That type of power, that ability to determine life or death of enemies and undoubtedly civilians caught in the crossfire, is the type of power that lends itself to becoming abused. And it's a type of power that the executive branch of the United States and the unitary executive retains. So there we can see like the application of that piece of evidence to this a little bit. I honestly think my explanation is a little bit, could require a few more logical steps, or maybe a couple more sentences to better explain how this supports this thesis statement. But I think it's pretty good for now, and I think it would do decent from an AP grading standpoint. And also what I would say too, because this is an essay that I specifically manipulated myself to try to make it speak to more towards issues that are of more interest to you guys, that this part where I ask you to specifically explain how a program in the global war on terror supports this thesis statement is basically an expansion upon this paragraph right here in some sense. And so it can further add clarity as to what you kind of argue here, how it supports this thesis statement. So specifically, this is where you just talk about the program. You can talk about it generally. The drone program, I'm going to say the Obama administration expanded the drone program in the global war on terror. Although the drone program is legally justified, and this is where you can see like the Harold Coe video right here. So 2:30 or 23 minutes and 35 seconds to 24 minutes and 30 seconds. You can see where Harold Coe defends the legality of the drone program. And I think that the legality of the drone program is the legal basis that the Obama administration gives for the drone program is probably pretty robust compared to the legal basis that the Bush administration lawyers gave for the CIA and DoD enhanced interrogation programs. Probably not as robust as the Obama administration's legal basis for the drone program. But things can still be legal and we could still not like them, right? They can still be legally justified. They can still be constitutional. They can still be, well within the executive, within Article 2 authorities of the President of the United States, but we could still not like them, right? And so this essay 2 is predominantly an essay about not liking them, about determining whether the critique of authoritarian and illiberal is valid. The Obama administration expanded the drone program in the global war on terror. Although the drone program is legally justified under President Obama's legal justification for the drone program as falling under the purview of his Article 2 Commander-in-Chief authorities during an armed conflict. Although President Obama's legal justification for the drone program is falling under the purview of the Article 2 Commander-in-Chief authorities during an armed conflict, the program itself is still authoritarian and illiberal. It's robust, and so robust means strong. That's what I added. Although President Obama's legal justification for the drone program is falling under the purview of Article 2 Commander-in-Chief authorities during an armed conflict is robust, the program itself is still authoritarian and illiberal. And so if you watch the Coe video, it is kind of extraordinary because if you think about it, Coe says pretty dramatically, how does he justify as a lawyer in the Obama administration drone strikes in several different countries, right? There's drone strikes not only in places and the nature of conflict has changed, and we talked a little bit about this too earlier. The nature of conflict, where the United States is going to war with a terrorist organization, not a state or a country, is going to war with Al-Qaeda, or going to war with insurgent groups, or going to war with different types of terrorist networks that don't necessarily have a specific territorially defined border that they reside within, right? That kind of type of war is naturally going to be different, right? And the Article 2 authority, specifically the Commander-in-Chief provision, and the authorities and powers that the Commander-in-Chiefs or the presidents have invoked in times of war were certainly invoked more often than not in American history during times of conflict with other countries, not during times of conflict with a terrorist network or organization, right? But nonetheless, I think the legal basis is pretty robust. The Harold Coe in this video claims that the Obama administration or Obama has a legal justification for the drone program, which covertly dropped drones with the CIA in Pakistan, for example, a country that the United States is not at war with, but nonetheless against suspected Al-Qaeda operatives in Pakistan, dropped drone strikes in Somalia, a country, again, the United States is not at war with, but the targeting of specific terrorist networks or networks similar to Al-Qaeda or Al-Qaeda affiliated networks in different countries. I think there's been drone strikes in 7 countries, I want to say, under the Obama administration. That is certainly, that's interesting, right? It's definitely a different type of war, and it's definitely shows that the authorities and laws that presidents and government officials often draw upon to justify their actions are very much created in eras where the world looked very much differently, and so the task of applying those authorities and laws to the present day naturally leads to, it has consequences, or just has consequences. I'll leave it at that. The program itself is still authoritarian and liberal, and then here's where I need to describe specifically, and this is where you would describe the drone program, the administration's targeted strikes, where did not know the names of, but were, as they fit the profile of someone who is affiliated with a militant or terrorist or Al-Qaeda affiliated terrorist authoritarian and illiberal. It is authoritarian because the Obama administration oftentimes counted individuals killed in these strikes as combatants rather than civilians, even if they didn't know the identity of that person. Also, obviously illiberal because it denies the victim's liberty and dignity. Is authoritarian because of oftentimes counted individuals killed in those strikes. You can also talk about how the Obama administration's process was very opaque for how they went through the decision-making process. Was very opaque for who was considered in these drone strikes. You can also talk about that as well, which is addressed in length in the John Oliver video, and I think in the Cronin and Byman articles that I'll put in the description. Okay. So that's pretty good. That's pretty decent explanation. Kind of links back to here, but it just kind of defines that a bit. It's a pretty good essay. You can actually link that together if you want. Now where I provide an alternative perspective, this is going to be very helpful for those that are arguing a different perspective that want to defend Obama. So you could put, there are some that may argue that in times of war, that the Obama administration pursued or attempted to preserve the national security of the United States. Specifically, that in times of war, there are unfortunate civilian casualties. And secrecy predominates the execution of war, right? And I think that's an important argument, and this can definitely be something that you make, right? Your thesis statement, if you were to argue the opposite and like defend either President Obama or President Bush's administration, and then support it with Federalist 70, but you don't have to. But then you want to provide an alternative perspective and then refute that alternative perspective. And so here's how you can refute it. However, the Obama administration's drone program, and this is something you would get from the Cronin article, greatly diminishes the national security of the United States because the conflict the United States is engaged in is fundamentally different from the conflicts of the past between. This conflict is between conflicts the U.S. is engaged in. The global war on terror is between the United States, which is a country, and a terrorist network. Terrorist gain in popularity for every civilian that is killed in a drone strike. Real and imagined. And what I mean by real and imagined could just be like, do you really think that the Al-Qaeda operatives in Yemen would report accurate statistics about civilians killed in drone strikes? And if the Obama administration itself doesn't know the exact number of civilians killed in drone strikes, or has this kind of vague protocols and a lot of secrecy surrounding drone strikes around the world, it gives the different types of terrorist networks and militants that the United States is going after around the world a propaganda advantage to further recruit and grow their support networks. So this would be the type of argument, right? And so this is the type of argument you can find in Cronin. You can also find it here, and then this is a good essay. All right. Bye-bye, my friends.